All right. We'll get started, hey? So, g'day, David. Thank you so much for joining me today to be part of my interview series, and where we discuss all things career-related. So I'd like to start, if I could, with a little bit about you as a person, who David is. And so I'd like you to just tell me, who are you? And for the audience, why should they care? What about some young professional people out there? Why should they care about who you are and what you have to say?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here. I appreciate you offering this opportunity to have an interview. So my name's David Bainbrig. I'm an executive engineer. I have qualifications in engineering and business and leadership. And I think what I want people to understand partially is that I'm proof that you don't have to fit within a box that everyone else fits within. I started my career in engineering, and I've got a lot of experience in the heavy engineering field, predominantly in mining and oil and gas. But these days I'm a leadership expert and I work across different industries. And I think that's unusual. In my experiences, that's unusual. And for people, especially young people who are now mapping out their careers or sort of imagining what they can become, it's that there's many versions of things that people don't talk about, and I'm one of them, where I predominantly am in people development now, but I come from an engineering background. And that sort of shows you that really as you go through your career, you can really pick and choose where you want to go. You know, most people will envisage something for you, but actually it's really up to you to choose your own adventure. And in some cases, that's what I've done, and now I have a career in people development, having started my life as a heavy engineer.
Very cool. So, obviously, for those that are watching this don't know how much you and I speak, we speak a lot every week. So we're quite well acquainted with each other. So I know a reasonable amount about your career already. So, I know you've had quite an extensive career, right? Across multiple industries, multiple businesses, spanning all the way from, grad, entry level, all the way to the top of the corporate hierarchy. So, I'd love to hear more about what that kind of, wide exposure across multiple businesses from the very bottom to the very top. I'd love to hear more about that career story. So, fill me in on maybe from the start.
Yeah, so my professional career starts in sort of when I was 19. So sort of, the 2000 is probably a reasonably good place to look at it. And I consider that difference between my professional career and my pre-professional career. And I think, as you've mentioned previously, I don't think it's a black and white start and finish. I think it all sort of influences where you end up. But my career path started, if you talk about my professional career, the selection of university degree. So I have 2 degrees. I did a chemical engineering degree and a business management in international marketing degree. And then the way my career developed after that was that, like most people, you have a casual job, but in engineering, to graduate, you need 60 days of professional experience. And that's often your start as a professional. You have to go and work for an engineering company or a company that specializes in engineering services, and you have to be supervised by an engineer. And that, for most people, including myself, is where you formally say that's the start of your career. And in my case, that internship work experience eventually turned into a job offer. And so I was offered a full-time role at that company as I graduated. So I really didn't have a gap afterwards. In fact, I started working as soon as I finished my final exams and started traveling for that company before the year was out. So my career started really with a running start, having transitioned straight from the internship work experience into a full-time role in the mining industry.
Yeah, wow. So most people have a bit of a gap, especially for the job search process. For a lot of people, it'll be finish your degree. All right, now I need to find myself a graduate position. But it seems that you smoothly and very quickly transitioned from one into the other. Can you tell us a bit more about that experience?
It was very easy. I think it's you come out of your university into an unknown job market, and for me, the market was quite different from what it is now. So jobs were more difficult to find, and so being able to convert what was an internship into a full-time role was actually, in some cases, the goal for many people, is demonstrate the value that you can bring, and you're in the box seat to get a role if they've got one available. And so I sort of started working towards that goal anyway in third year and fourth year to determine if I liked the business and I liked the industry, but also that idea that to start somewhere else, I would be competing against a lot of other people who had no differentiator, whereas with this business, I already had developed a lot of knowledge about their business. I already had colleagues there. I had people to endorse me. You know how, like, if you look for references, if you're going for a new job, you need references for other businesses. As an intern and someone who worked there as an undergrad, I had quite a good network of people at the business who then endorsed me as being someone who was worth keeping. So it was a very natural selection. What it meant for me, though, is there's a couple of things that I've reflected on. It meant that the work ethic that you bring from university, where you have this rigor that you have to get through your final exams, in some respects for me, there wasn't really a time when I changed work ethics. I went straight from high school through to university and straight into work, which is not necessarily recommended. But when I reflect on it, it's that there wasn't really a time when I had nothing to do. I worked through university, and then basically as soon as my subjects finished, I was studying for the exams and working, and then broadly the company offered me a role before the exam started, which was, if you successfully complete your degree, you'll have a job. And then, of course, they took a punt on that and offered me the job, and of course the rest is history. So I started work straight away. And when you are a graduate, you don't really know what industry is going to be like. And when you're undergrad, you're given a bit of a program you follow to get you the experience you need. But I was really just thrown in the deep end, and I met a lot of clients and travelled the East Coast very heavily, got lots of experience. And I spent the first 5 years of my career with that company and travelled all throughout Australia. And as you know, I travelled all up into Southeast Asia as well. I worked through the oil and gas industry up there. And after 5 years, I then changed businesses.
So I'd like to dig into that overseas work a little bit more. So we've covered about the first 5 years, and I definitely want to work towards the stages that happened after, from the 5 year point through the expat experience, living and working overseas, through to, as I mentioned before, from the bottom to the top. So I'm trying to show people this career path, to try and understand how it worked for you.
Yeah, so to sort of speed things up, I went, after 3 years in Australia, I went and accepted an expat role. And for me, that's the start of sort of a shift in mindset. When you come out of university, you get a job and you don't really have this idea that you're going to work through these chapters, you just start working. And being offered an expat role was that sudden realization that the world's much bigger. I can work in the office, in this case it was working in the office of the Gold Coast, and have a little life and set it all up, and off I go, and my career will be lots of little steps, but eventually I'll progress. When I started to work as an expat, so I accepted a role to live in the Philippines and work throughout Southeast Asia. And for someone who's in their early 20s, and remember that this is now a little while ago, that's a huge, scary and exciting opportunity. Pick yourself up, go overseas. You only speak English, so good luck. Mm-hmm. And suddenly it becomes this massive learning experience, not this incremental go through university, you learn something all the time, get your new job, you're in a graduate program. This was everything's new. Language, culture, people. I was moving from mining to oil and gas. And when you're young and you don't know any better, you tend to make a fist of these things and you just have a go. And you learn as you go and you make mistakes and you suck it up and you keep going. And that was probably the beginning of a complete change in mindset. From my career is this linear thing that I go in and I do my time and I'll stay at this business until some unforeseen thing happens and I'll leave. The change to the expat lifestyle in this case just became this eye-opening experience that then probably set one of those keystones for my career, which is you can make it anything you want. And of course, when I moved to Southeast Asia, I was working with the Americans, and I was working in oil and gas, and I was working with the government, and you just have this really, really wide exposure. And I think that's where the realization came too, that the really wide exposure is just a learning curve that you can't get sitting in your office in Brisbane or the Gold Coast. And so I met lots of people. I learned to work with a really diverse group of people, challenging projects in an industry I hadn't worked in before. And so that, I think, really kick-started that, not really a quest, but a desire to not just plod along, but to really start taking leaps and bounds. And I think that mindset shift has really laid the foundations for then what was a very, very rapid acceleration in my career through the next 10 years.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested to hear more about that rapid acceleration. I think, and perhaps the mindset about the scary risk taking that was moving overseas, especially as you point out, as a 20-something-year-old, living and working overseas in a foreign country that you don't know the culture, you don't know the language. That sounds like a big step for someone to take that early in their career. So I'd love to hear more about what you were thinking at the time, like what compelled you to take that risk, and then noting that risk paid off, how that rapid acceleration, how it occurred, even just the story about how that rapid acceleration happened, the milestones along the way.
Yeah, so I think what happens is there's always something that changes, and it would have been very easy to say no. So I'm very comfortable in Australia, and my family is here. I grew up in Australia, and it's not just a small change. It's sort of throwing everything away that you're used to and being willing to, I guess, not lose that, but willing to set that aside for the opportunity to pursue something different. And I have to say, even then, it was a confronting decision. Like, even now I can remember, and I can even feel a little tingle of when someone says, so you won't see your family, you won't see your friends, you'll know nothing, you won't speak the local language, everything will be different. It's probably a situation that you rarely find yourself in. Occasionally when you grow up, you change schools and you meet new people, but this is new everything. Like, absolutely everything. They drive on the other side of the road, everything new. And so you can't quantify, like if you use your normal engineering brain to go, well, these are the pros and these are the cons and these are the pluses and these are the minuses, it's almost a futile effort because your list is never ending. Here are all the differences. Well, everything you could possibly think of. And so you kind of have to take a punt. And I think that's a mixture of backing yourself that you will land on your feet, and also having a support network that also backs you and will probably help you recover if things don't go the way you hope. And otherwise, once you've got those couple of things in place, you really just have to take the leap. I think there's this really good saying about you can't cross a chasm in tiny little steps. And for me, that's always been a little bit of a mental image that's, you got to jump. And so I couldn't have gone and lived in the Philippines by taking little tiny steps up the coast of Queensland and across the PNG and eventually just gotten there. It's like you pack your one suitcase, and that's probably the hallmark is you pack that one suitcase and you're like, I'm going to the Philippines, I'll figure it out when I get there. And that then opens your eyes to, well, this was successful. This worked out really well. There must be more options than this. And so you start to build a professional network and you start to go and see what the world has to offer. And I think it's character building, but it's also career building. You grow as a person when you do these sorts of things. And you gain confidence. And so all these benefits come along after you take that first leap. And so then I worked for that company for a while in the Philippines, and then I met another expat who they were opening an office in the Philippines, and I joined that company. And of course, as you make changes through your career, those opportunities lead to other opportunities. So I joined that company, and living in the Philippines makes you a bit rare, and that means that you can access more senior roles than you would be. So imagine if I worked in Australia for the same company, I'd be competing with all the other engineers in Brisbane. But if you're working in the Philippines and you're an expat engineer with mining experience, you're possibly one of one. So in terms of the opportunity that's open to you, is fantastic compared to if you were in Brisbane and you're one of many and you're all competing for that one role. So my career accelerated more rapidly because I was willing to do the unusual. I was willing to live in the Philippines as an expat, and therefore I progressed through my career more quickly. Now, there's a risk that comes with that, because if you're in Australia, it might take you 5 years, and if you're in the Philippines, it might take you 1 year. All right, so you have to still have that appetite, and you have to still have that growth mindset, and you have to still be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because if you say yes, then 60% of the job might be new again. And if you think about what normally happens in a career, you get in a career, you work in this job or this role until you get very, very comfortable, and you get very, very good at it, and people pay you very well to stay there, and the gravity of it all kind of actually takes the edge off your career growth. Whereas if you continually see opportunities to go forwards, you also have to be happy to be always uncomfortable. So someone says, well, we'd like you to lead this now. And your brain says, well, I don't really know how to do that because I've never done it before. And again, there's the chasm. You can't just do a little bit of it. Someone says, will you take the role or won't you? And the brave part of you goes, all right, how bad could it be? And so I had an interview with another gentleman who does career planning for people. And I said, so what happened for me is I went through 3 stages of promotions into engineering management within 3 years. And he said, oh, I don't think we want to tell people that because that's unrealistic. And the interesting thing is, yes, it is unrealistic if you look at everyone else and you want to be part of the crowd. But I went sort of from a discipline engineer to an engineering manager within 3 years. And that's very, very rapid career growth. And that's been the hallmark. It's that keeping your eye open for what's next, and always taking, as you said, the risk that goes with it. Because if you try and do a little bit, or if you say not now, maybe later when I'm ready, the opportunity goes, but also you don't get the big gains. It just sort of becomes as this linear path rather than this aspirational curve. So did that for a long time. Engineering management, went through a bunch of different projects, a bunch of studies, worked in different countries and continents, and then then basically that was the end of my technical career. Changed after 9 years. I went into engineering director and then vice president. And then I finished my corporate career, and I find myself here with you, talking to you, but now I'm in the leadership development, personal development space.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I take away from that is that if you want to have results that most people don't get, you have to be willing to do what most people don't do. And in your case, that was you were willing to take that leap, move to the Philippines, and differentiate yourself. And I think that's if you want results like everyone else, do the same thing as everyone else does. If you want different results to everyone else, you need to do something different. And the evidence is there. Like, that's exactly what you did, and that's how, and you attribute that to the very rapid career growth that you experienced. And so that was your, we'll say, corporate career. And, we've jammed a lot of years into not so many minutes, and I'm sure there are more stories, but I'm also very interested to hear more about what happened post-corporate, about where you fit, how that transition happened. I'd love to hear about some of what people might consider the less traditional parts of your career post the stories we've just heard.
Yeah, so and I think to give context to that, I think it's worth looking at the last couple of years of my corporate career, because that, again, as I often talk about, is this foundational idea that you still have to have something to springboard you into the next part. It's quite difficult if you go into some field you have no experience in. It's not unusual. I guess it is unusual, but it's not impossible. But what happened was that when I transitioned into a very high senior executive role, you have the privilege of choice. So you lead a large organisation, and there's lots of things to dedicate your attention to. And I had come from a technical background, a really heavy technical background, had built and designed very large projects and run large teams of technical people. And so in some cases, you would say with my experience and my expertise, I had that in the bag. And I think a lot of executives tend to get into their new roles and double down on what they know. So that's what's been successful for them. So they continue to stay involved in that, and they continue to try and add value by getting more involved in those things. And my approach was very non-traditional. So I decided to become an executive, knowing that I would be stepping away from something that I really knew, was really comfortable with and really enjoyed. And I was able to access opportunities to do lots of other things. But with that comes a choice. You get into an executive role and you can lean back into the stuff you know and are good at, and probably people will pat you on the back because it's pretty guaranteed you're going to do a good job because you know a lot about it and you've got a lot of experience. Or you can look at the rest of the role and say, well, I don't know much at all about this stuff, but I think that's where the most benefit will come. And so for me, with the experience I had in my technical part of my engineering career, I'd already developed this understanding that process, systems, and technical capability were fine, but it was really the people made the difference. And so that when I was given an executive role, I decided to make that my choice of focus. So I started to get very interested in, how do you get high-performing teams and how do you get high-performing people and how do we improve the diversity in the culture? And I looked at the business from graduate programs and scholarships all the way through to ascension programs and succession planning. And so I spent years really working in that space. And so when it came time to step away from my corporate career, I had two very logical choices. I'm well known in the industry for my engineering expertise, and I could easily go and get another job at another company, or I could open a consultancy around this engineering technical stuff, and I'm sure it would be successful. But instead, I decided to, in some ways, take a punt and lean into the people development space because I felt that's where the most benefit to industry was, and it's an area that I'm passionate about. And so, again, that wouldn't be possible without having built a foundation with some intention about where I wanted to go. If I'd spent those 3 years working more in the technical space, it would be inauthentic to then come out in the industry and say, hey, look, I'm an expert in this area. But having spent 3 years doing nothing but people development and leadership, it makes perfect sense for me to continue on that as basically the next chapter of my career, which is how we find ourselves here today.
And so you mentioned your foundation there, your career foundation, and I think there was probably more than one foundation you built across those numerous years there. And I know you like to think about careers because we obviously spoken before this about careers in terms of breadth and height. So I'd like to understand what you mean in more detail about the breadth of your career and of careers of other people and the height.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic. It's one of my favorites actually because in sort of the coaching and mentoring that I do, I feel like it has to be an intentional decision. That's not how everyone sees it, but for me that's important. And in my career, there's several spots where I made an intentional decision to stop what I was doing and increase the breadth of my experience. So a good example is when I took the punt to go to the Philippines and start working in oil and gas. I was already growing in expertise in mining, and it would have been far simpler and far easier to just continue to get more mining expertise. Different commodities, similar industries, pretty easy to become a specialist. When I decided to move to the Philippines, I switched from mining to oil and gas. So an entire new industry. And that meant everything was new. So by far I wasn't an expert. But in my mind, what that does, it improves your base or your foundational experience, your foundational expertise, is that, excuse me, that's unfortunate, is that what that does is that it means that suddenly you can interact with an entire new sphere of people. You can learn entire new lexicon of language and all the techniques and technical elements of an industry. from the beginning. And for me, I knew nothing about oil and gas, like nothing. So you really have to seek out that information to be able to have conversations with people. Some people are willing to help you, other people expect that you will know. So it's a tricky thing to navigate. And in that role in oil and gas, I progressed into more management roles because, as you know, there are lots and lots of great technical people. And remembering that I'd only just entered the oil and gas industry, I had very little technical knowledge. So the other skills that I had to develop was, well, I have to find people that know because I don't have time to figure it out myself. So there's another skill set of basically assembling a team of experts to achieve the outcomes you're looking for rather than being the expert yourself. And so quickly I became a manager because if you're no good at technical, you either leave the industry or you become a manager. That's sort of how managers work. And so I think I was the Southeast Asia manager for oil and gas. But what that really meant was that I didn't do anything technical anymore. And fundamentally, I identified as being an engineer, and that didn't align for me. So actually, once I'd reached that reasonably high management position, there was again that decision of, well, I spent a lot of time learning. I went to university to become an engineer. I really only spent 3 to 5 years, maybe only 4 years as an engineer before I started to do purely management stuff. And so the switch back to being a process engineer was again one of those broadenings or gaining foundational width rather than height. I was already quite high, I was already a manager, and I could have just continued on that career path, and without any further technical knowledge, the only option available to me would have become more senior management. The change to becoming a process engineer took me back to literally doing calculations. So I basically changed careers to open up a whole new area of experience. And then through that, I went through senior and lead roles and engineering management roles. And every time it changed, I had to learn something new. The other option would have been to just double down on doing one thing really well. And the answer is not black and white. The world needs highly specialized people to do highly specialized things. But then I think people like me, who were never really going to be technical specialists, the opportunity to continue to grow with a diverse range of experience, I think grows that really wide foundational base and means that even now in my career as a more mature person, I can swing between process engineering through to people development. I can come back into engineering management because I've got this very wide base. Now, there will most likely be people who are better at those individual things than me, but it's unlikely that you could have someone who sits in front of you that has that breadth of knowledge. That in itself is a rare commodity. So finding specialists, in my opinion, is easier than finding extremely good generalists. And that's where I think a lot of my career differentiation happened, is not being too obsessed with becoming the best at a thing, but being always open to picking up an adjacent thing or a new industry or a new role to get that width.
I'd like to pick up on a few bits you pointed out there. So you're swapping and changing between technical and leadership or management roles. Some of the traditional advice that is out there around careers would talk about focusing on one thing, mastering it, and that chopping and changing, so to speak, can slow you down. It can be detrimental to your career. Clearly, it has not been detrimental to your career. And so I'd like you to, I guess, talk to that. Tell me a bit about why you think maybe for you it wasn't detrimental. Do you think it can be detrimental for other people's careers? And then talk a little bit about your state of mind and your decision-making process when you were deciding to go, you know what, I'm going to change industries, or I'm going to become a process engineer, move from management back onto the tools, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it can be detrimental. And in some cases, there were parts of it being detrimental for me. You know how there's not that many things that are black and white. So I think it's detrimental if you would know I speak lots about purpose, right? And for me, that comes back to even the reason I did it. I personally have never chased money, and that's not. I didn't make that as a logical decision, but it's just that it's not as big a driver for me. And so the chopping and changing for me was driven more around knowledge and experience and education and expertise and understanding and interest, which then drives the behaviours when you get there. So, for instance, if I change jobs because someone just offered me more money, my motivation to go there is for the money. So when I'm there, my behaviours are aligned with what my motivation was to get there. However, if I've gone there because I have an appetite for learning and I'm genuinely intrigued, then I go there with a learning mindset and I kind of squeeze the most out of that career chapter because I'm genuinely interested in knowing more. Or I just sit around, take the paycheck, and keep looking for somewhere else that pays me more money. Now, one, I feel, really develops expertise and knowledge and experience, and you really want to find out more. And the other is you mark time until someone else offers you more money to go somewhere else. And so the motivation behind changing probably, in some respects, defines how successful you will be. Because I think if you chop and change chasing money, and that's your main motivation, then sort of the money trail often runs out. You know, the economy cools, and then you might get caught in the first in, first out sort of, or what is it, last in, first out sort of mentality. So it can be detrimental. It doesn't demonstrate loyalty. So there are a lot of downsides to it. But often even if you're genuine about the reasons for leaving and it's not about money, you actually create a really strong network of people that probably support you on your career journey. You know, like if I've got a manager and I say, look, I've been considering leaving and going to another job because there's an opportunity over there that you can't match. And it's not because I don't like it here, but I feel like this is an opportunity I can't pass up because it's got great learning opportunities and it's an overseas career opportunity, whatever the case may be. If you go to the person and say, I'm leaving because you don't pay me enough, and that's your motivator, it's a different thing. So nearly everyone that I've ever worked with or for, I've left on really good terms. And that all comes back to that, well, why are you switching? And for me, it's a hunger for learning more and it's a want to have this wide experience. If it's just chasing money, I think you expose yourself to a lot of that superficial, you were the last in, so you're the first out. Whereas if you've turned up and you really are invested in learning and becoming part of that business and understanding it, even if it's only for a short period of time, I think that holds value. So for me, it's been very successful. I probably have not earned as much money in my career as I could have if I'd been more particular around chasing the money. So I've turned down promotions that weren't aligned with what I wanted to do. I've had, countless phone calls from headhunters who offer more money to go and do different things. But if the opportunity hasn't interested me and it hasn't been aligned with what I want to achieve, other than money, I've generally not been interested. So I think, looking back, if money was your main driver, the way that I've changed my career several times has not earned me as much as I could. But I do think if you were just chasing the money around, I do think often changing jobs would be more detriment to your career than positive.
Interesting. 1 second. I'm just going to turn this thing on. That's okay. There we go. And grab a drink of water. So I'd like to change track a little and, get a little bit off track into some new territory here. So a lot of us like to think of our careers starting when we get our first real job. And you mentioned, I guess, your professional career. The beginning of your professional career was when you finished university, transitioned into the graduate role, post internship, and then things took off really quickly from there. I personally think to discount those, I guess, jobs that we have before we move into our professional careers is doing our history and our personal selves a disservice. I like to talk about with people, what my first job was. I think it's really important, and I think it's important for the people watching this to understand that those, they matter and they count. So, you know, my first job, interestingly, was in a Italian restaurant, and I was really, really bad at that job. Terrible. I was in the kitchen, and so I got this job through word of mouth. My brother worked there, and it was, you just show up on Thursday and start, and no training, no nothing, just come in. All right, you learn as you go.
Yeah.
I was supposed to be washing dishes. I was too slow, too terrible at washing dishes that I was quickly moved on from that. And I eventually got put on the pasta making stand in the back room away from everyone else.
The equivalent of peeling potatoes.
Yeah, that basically, yeah. And so, but I learnt a lot about life and about how to interact with people in the workplace. And, you know, the head chef, he had a bit of a temper, and, you know, dealing with some of those things that I'd never experienced before, I think added to my, I guess, arsenal of capabilities as I was growing up. It allowed me to deal with interesting situations. It allowed me to deal with conflict and adversity. And so, you know, I feel that I learned a lot from that. So, you know, I loved, well, I'm not going to say that. I didn't love that job. I loved getting paid because I was 18 and it paid cash in hand, right? So it could have been a lot worse. And it was, interestingly, that first job was not an hours for dollars per hour job. It was you work the night, the restaurant is open until there are no more customers, and you get paid the same amount. If we pack up at 10 o'clock and go home, here's your however much it was. If you are there till 2 a.m., you get the same amount. So it was quite an interesting situation. But I learned a lot from that. So, you know, I know you had an interesting job early, you know, pre-professional career. And I'd love to hear about your experiences working at the theme park. And I mean, I think everyone else wants to hear it too, right? I think, what was it about it that was so interesting? What did you like? And importantly, because we're trying to, you know, help people out with their career thinking here, what did you take from that and continue to apply into your career as you transitioned into a professional career? And even maybe, is there anything still to this day that you learned or continue to use that you got from that job at the theme park?
Yeah, so I worked at the theme park when I was in university. I might just flick back very quickly before that. So I started working when I was 14 and a half. And the reason that's important is because I grew up in an era where, especially with my group of friends, that was the done thing. And you were either going to work at Woolworths, work at Coles, probably McDonald's or KFC, and you had this lowest of the low entry-level job. And it's a really good place to, I guess, develop your humility around working. And so I had a number of jobs, and that was my first job, and I worked there all through high school. And then when I went to university, I had to do work experience, which we talked about. But the job that sort of helped me make ends meet before that was, well, actually before and during, was working at Dreamworld, which here in Australia is a theme park down the Gold Coast. And it's an amusement ride park. It's a themed thing, but it doesn't have animals and stuff, really. And so I applied there because a friend of mine had worked there the previous summer, and in Australia with the summer over Christmas, that's when you get these temporary jobs. And for me, that temporary job became a job that probably lasted for maybe 3 or 4 years, actually. Because, again, it's one of those jobs where once you're there and you're interested and you add value, sure, at the end of the summer season, nearly everyone is, you know, given their final pay packet, patted on the back and said, thanks, see you next year. And I was fortunate enough to be that sort of person that I really liked being there, and I really tried to make myself worth having around. And so they offered me an ongoing casual job there for essentially for as long as I wanted. And I worked there all through university, and I even worked there when I got my engineering job. I worked there on weekends. So I guess that's one thing that's important, is that when people talk about hard work, I worked 2 jobs at university, I did 2 degrees at university, and then when I graduated from university, I kept my casual job on the weekends, so I still worked 6 or 7 days a week. And the benefit of that is that when you do it and you don't know anything different, it's actually easier to keep doing it, because once you do have weekends off, it's much harder to get up on a Saturday morning and go to work. So I just kept going, and I kept going until it didn't really fit my life anymore. I had a young family, and working 7 days a week was not really the right thing to do in my mind. It could be right for others, but for me, that wasn't the right thing. So I gave up on the Dreamworld thing. And Dreamworld was wonderful. And the reason it's such an interesting part of my career is that, again, it's considerably outside of what a typical engineering student would do, right? It's you grow up with a foundation in maths and sciences, and you're an engineering student. And my normal job that I got with the work experience was in an engineering firm working with other engineers. And a theme park is like the antithesis of engineering. It's public facing, it's high energy, it's fun, it's exciting. And one of the nicest things is that everyone who's there has turned up already in the mindset to have a good time. And you get to be part of that experience. So it's very fun and it's very fulfilling. To be honest, it didn't pay very well, but I don't think back then many things did. So your role was to be, in my case, I was one of the ride attendants. And so the person who pushes the buttons and loads and unloads rides. And I used to, work inside the Gravitron, that ride that spins you out and sticks you to the wall. Yep. So I was the operator of that. You sit in the middle and you spin around. So I did a lot of these varied things. But what it really teaches you is that you have to address the public a lot. You're on the microphone a lot. You have to be upbeat. You're part of the experience. So you have to carry that experience sometimes. You need to bring a lot of energy. You interact with a huge diversity of people. Everything from fundamentally disabled people who would come in the parks in wheelchairs, and we would have to make special arrangements so that they could have a good time, through to people that maybe by the end of the day, when the kids are full of sugar, they're a bit sunburned, maybe they're not having as good a time, and you still want to contribute for them to have the best time they can. So you get that real diverse optimism, bright-eyed, shiny, ready to go in the morning, a bit burnt out, had a few too many hot dogs, a bit sunburned, and the parents are pretty much ready to leave, but you still want to give them a good time. So that diversity, I used to work in the rain, in the sun, there would be really hot days, there would be really cold days, and as a ride operator, you're sort of out in the elements most of the time too. You're walking around, securing people, letting people out. I worked on some of the big, really exciting rides, and that's surprisingly what I found in there is that it gives you a really nuanced understanding of safety. Those big theme park rides are fundamentally dangerous. So when you start, you work on the smaller rides that, if there's swings, they go around in circles. Bad things don't usually happen. And then you work on the roller coasters and the giant drop and things like that have this fundamental element of danger. And so when you start working on those rides, it couples that giving everyone this great experience, but it introduces this major element of being responsible for everyone's safety. And so if you look at how my career's progressed, and especially in the engineering field, that being responsible for other people's safety is something that I don't think, late teens, early 20-year-olds get that much exposure to. There's not that many jobs where they give you sort of the keys to this thing that fundamentally is quite a dangerous thing. So the safety training, the procedures and the operations, and the way in which you get people to align with those processes gives you a lot of skills, which I've then used to lead teams and lead organisations and develop projects. It's that awareness, the leadership, there's some compliance, but there's also getting people to want to be safe. And so that's probably an interesting element that's come out of that experience. The safety aspect is quite high. They're trying to give everyone a great experience despite adverse conditions, dealing with a diverse audience, communicating with a diverse audience, and also just bringing high energy to situations where maybe you don't even feel like it on the day. I think we all wake up sometimes and think, oh God, got to go to work. In these sorts of roles, you are the face of the experience they're going to have. So you almost have to just pull yourself together and make it happen. And they're all sorts of things that I think have carried me well through my career if I look back on that experience.
Sounds like it was a pretty fun job, a lot more fun than making pasta in the back room or peeling potatoes. I love the idea about being different again, right? Doing something different to what most other people do. I'm assuming because you were drawn to it, but also that again, it was probably a bit of a leap, a bit of a, you're doing something different, and like you're differentiating yourself. You're not doing what the rest of your engineering student friends are doing. Oh, well, we're going to go and do this. You go like, okay, well, I'm going to work at Dreamworld, and that's what I do. I like that being different on purpose, intentional being different, not to cause, consternation, not to cause issues, but because it kind of fits you for who you feel you are. So, I mean, we could probably spend all day talking about Dreamworld, but I'm going to move back to the professional career now. And I know you spent quite a long time overall, not necessarily altogether, but quite a long time in engineering management roles, and senior engineering management and engineering director, those sorts of things, leadership in engineering. I want to know, you've explained a little bit about what drew you in and why you decided to get into those things, but what kept you there? What kept you interested? Why did you stay for so long in similar kinds of roles like that?
Yeah, I've reflected on this a little bit actually, Dan. See, I think if my only driver was money or career growth, when I look back on it, I would say with a critical eye that I spent too much time there. Now, but when I was doing it, I wouldn't. And it's really interesting because depending on what your motivator is and how you mark yourself, you might say, well, to be honest, I probably could have become a director a little bit earlier, and I probably could have moved into the executive suite a little bit earlier too, if I played my cards a bit differently. But of course, you don't know, because my success as a director and my success as an executive, it may not have been as easy if I didn't have the extra couple of years of experience under my belt. So who knows, right? Like, the opportunity may not have been offered to me without the years of experience, and I might not have been able to make my career as successful without that additional depth. So the reason I say that is because I think it was 9 or 10 years that I was engineering manager. Now, what you may see if you look through my resume is that it was still a considerable growth period. So everything that I tackled was one step harder than the thing I tackled previously. And some of it is enjoyment. I like a challenge, but some of it is growth mindset, that I don't want to rinse and repeat. And making that clear to everyone, that that's why I'm here. Like, I'm here to do great work for you, but also to continue to develop a career, and not just have a career, but develop it, grow it. And so even though I sat in an engineering management role for a long period of time, I think I started out doing a simple mineral sands project, small, Australian-based, New South Wales. And I finished on a study, I think it started out as a $6 billion project that we were studying, and it included the offshore port facility, the onshore port facility, a power station, a power line, road, mine, tailings dam, village, infrastructure. So across those years, every engagement I undertook, I tried to ensure that it had an element that I'd never done before. And even if I look through that, by the time I was 29, I was an engineering manager. But by the time I was in my mid-30s, I was doing studies and projects where the scope was everything. And that meant that I had other engineering managers below me looking after those areas, and each of them had disciplined teams. So the team sizes started to become 100 plus people. And so even though I look like the title didn't change very much, the sheer scope of the role was always growing. And I think by the time I got to the end of that, I'd reached the limit of other things you could bolt on. So if you think about how in mining, it goes from the ground to a ship, right? And so The last two pieces I sort of had not experienced before was maybe the power station and the port. Now, that doesn't make me an expert in those things, but once you know what needs doing, you find the people that know what they're doing, you can manage the process, which is, of course, the engineering management skill set. But then after that, to stay in mining, is that everything would be a repeat. And probably in that last year or so was the time when I started to really no longer just look for incremental opportunities. I started to look for what's next. And I actually proposed to the vice president at the time that we create this role where I could look after all of the engineering, which included all of the projects and all of the studies. And I actually pitched it. And then I applied for it and I wrote the job description and was given the role. So that would have been one of those really intentional step changes where I sort of had run out of rope and there was no more things that I could bolt on. It would have all been more of the same. And that was when I had to go out of my way to really invoke change. There was not much organic growth left. And then I went and I approached them and I said, I think the next thing the business needs is this. And I think it should be me. And, it wasn't quite as simple as that. But then, I went through a proper interview process and they went external for the role and interviewed some people and I got the role. With it came a lot of money. But again, not really the driver. More convincing than I needed the role, that I was the person for it, and then we had a salary negotiation at the end. So, in that sequence of, I think there's a need, I think I can fill it. I have some gaps, but I'm reasonably good at filling my own gaps through my methodologies. And if we all agree, and you'd like me, how much is it worth to you? And that's always been, I know that's not a classical approach, but for me, it's always money comes last. If you know you want to work together, you can make the money work. But if money's your incentive, then you're more interested in getting it to work to make the money work. So I've always found, now of course that's not an excellent negotiation tactic because they know that you already want to be there. But if you've developed that relationship through that process where they really value you and they really want you, then you generally will find you can make the money work. And sometimes you can't, but what you really want in my mind is everyone to be really happy. So they don't want to have paid too much. You don't want to have sacrificed too much. But if you both start sort of hand in hand and you're really happy that it's something you're doing together, then the money is right. And that's sort of my approach. So that's what I did. That's when I changed to being really no longer on the tools. And it was really hard because I really liked that job. And, even these days I'm tempted when someone says, hey, do you want to come in and just do this one little thing? And I know that it's a slippery slope, right? And I say, I really would, but that's not who I am these days. And it's pretty tough, actually.
I can relate to that. I can relate moving from technical roles to non-technical roles to leadership and management roles. And there is still a strong draw for, I think, people like you and I that have the brains that we have. There's a constant pull back into the technical because it's so exciting and interesting, and I think potentially that's what got us interested in it in the first place. You've mentioned to me before that to be successful, and some of your stories convey this information too, to be successful you don't need to know everything, but it is very important to know what you don't know. So what do you mean by that? What does that mean to you, and how does that fit into your idea of what success is?
Yeah, so I think through the rapid growth in my career, my career accelerated much more quickly when I accepted the fact that I would not be great at everything, and when to ask for help and when to lean on people who were great at everything. Because ultimately, especially in middle management roles, there's this trade-off between you're paid to get great outcomes. And while it can be tempting to do things yourself or believe that you're really good at it, as soon as you acknowledge the fact that you probably are not the best at it and maybe you don't know, then it opens up the world of possibilities to go find someone who's awesome at it. And through my career, from about my I'd say from my late 20s, I've nearly always led teams of people who have more experience than me. And so my expertise is not knowing. My expertise is knowing that I don't know and finding people that do know. And that's always been, I was very fortunate early on to be able to handpick a lot of my teams. And a lot of what I've said through my career is that my success is actually the culmination of everyone else's success. You've done great, makes me look good. If you don't do great, it makes me not look good. Now, does that mean that I actually know how to do it all? Not at all. And so for me, being successful is around having a team that inherently can achieve that success. So the skill for me is actually finding those people, creating an environment for them where they can achieve better than expected results, and then making sure that you get performance that's greater than the sum of its parts. And then you look great. But not because you're awesome at any of the stuff that they do. You're awesome at pulling them all together and getting that outcome. And so as soon as I started recognizing this, and it would have been my late 20s, where whenever I was presented with something, if it wasn't within my knowledge, my first choice would be to find someone. Not finding a what or a how, but finding a who. And so I would get up from my desk, and this is late 20s, so reasonably young, and I would go to people's offices, because that's what you used to do when the world wasn't quite as digital, and you would say, I need some help. And people really want to help, as long as you are genuine and open. And so I have some of the best mentors, I'm sure, within the industry, and it's always been because I've approached them with this authentic, I need your assistance with this, I don't know. And so I have a hugely strong network of technical people and engineering technical leaders, because early on in my career, I basically went to their offices and said, look, I need your help. I've been given this responsibility, which requires me to do these things that I don't know how to do, but you know how to do them, and I really need you to help me with that. And when you sort of put yourself out there in that authentic and vulnerable manner, I have found that generally people are really willing to help, and they're very generous with their time, because people are very busy, and highly skilled people are very busy. And if you're that person who can genuinely ask for help and they feel committed to assist you, that's going to make you successful. So for me, it's always been about finding a who and not a what and a how.
So do you think that those experiences that you had, however you came to that realization that that was the way to go forward, it must have worked initially, and that reinforced your behavior, and you would continue to use that behavior to get the outcomes you're looking for? And earlier on you mentioned, you've moved into people development, leadership development, and that you have this philosophy of the people are everything, people first. So did you realize at any point did you have a light bulb moment? Was there a point in time, or was it a gradual transition into this mindset? And did you at a point realize that this is my why, this is my purpose?
So the last part of your question is a tough one. So I don't think in my 20s and 30s, I don't think I'd managed to crystallize it into a good purpose. I think it was a mixture of doing what I loved, doing things that were successful, that got good outcomes, and seeing how happy everyone could be while still doing great things. I think the first experience, well, actually, we talked before that when I started my career, I actually started on the shop floor, sweeping floors. So I've worked with sort of blue collar through the boardroom. And I often say people are people. They still want to be valued. They still want to be looked after. They still want to feel safe when they go to work. They want to feel like their opinion matters. And so the early part of my career, I was the very, very, very bottom. Right? I was the guy who, got the broom. And if you're not sure what to do, grab the broom. And if you don't know what to do, just walk around with it, look busy. But you'll always have a broom. There'll always be something you can sweep. And so then you need people to give you jobs. because otherwise you're walking around with a broom all day. So after you've swept the floor for the umpteenth time, you go to someone and you say, look, I've kind of done this a few times now. Is there something I could help you with? And they say, well, what do you know how to do? And you're like, nothing. I can sweep floors really well. But other than that, and so then it's again the same thing, but a little bit different, but it's the same side of the coin. I don't know. I'd like to do something good, but I need you to help me understand how to do it. So when you look at that, and again, you have to be vulnerable, because I think when you're in your teens and 20s, you often have this idea that you know it all and you can do it all. But it's far quicker if you say, I don't know, and can you help me? Like, you can figure it out yourself, or you can get someone to show you. And so that job, even in my, I think I was late teens, like 19, is that people, if you approach people and you say, hey, I'd like to help, but I don't know how, so I need your help to tell me how to do this, they're also really willing. And so even on the shop floor, you'd say, like, I don't know how to drive a forklift. Now, by the way, for anyone who's listening, you need a forklift license these days. Back then, wasn't the case. Just to make sure no one's doing this, you need a forklift license these days. Back then, it'd be, I'd really like to help. I'd like to help in a bigger way than sweeping the floor, but I really don't know anything. So what do you think I could do? And then can you show me how to do it? And that's what expanded my scope. So my career growth from the very, very first time I stepped foot into the sort of corporate workplace was putting myself out there and saying, I don't know, but I really want to learn. And I'm willing for you to tell me like I'm a dummy. And I'm willing to admit it up front. And then I'm willing to make a few mistakes. I'm willing to own up for them and ask for your help. And that process of asking for help, and genuine, not like asking for help because I'm too lazy to do it myself, but genuine around. And so I know, and this is a little bit of a sidetrack, I know all sorts of interesting stuff from that part of my career. Shipping, packing, picking, manufacturing, painting. You go to a paint shop, you say, why do you guys do this? And they go, here, I'll show you. And you find yourself in a painting booth. Back then, without all the appropriate PPE, but these days you would. But so I know all about that, not within my job description. But then what happens is when someone says, hey, do you want to look after quality control? You're like, yes, actually, because I spent time in the fab shop, I spent time in the paint shop, I spent time on site, I know what to look for, I know what the tools are, I know where they are. I am prepared. So being willing to ask for help and learn new things also prepares you to be able to take advantage of opportunities. And so it's always been that way for me. When I was in my mid-20s and became a manager for the first time, that's when it became necessary. Up until then, it was always a growth thing. I wanted to know, I'm interested, tell me. When I hit my mid-20s, I took on my first management role, and then it became a necessary skill. It was in oil and gas, like I said. I really didn't know anything. I had 2 experienced engineers working for me in the office in a bunch of representative companies, and I was completely out of my depth. So there was no option. There was like, I don't know where to go to get the information. I don't know anything about the process. And so that switch on mindset was now something that had been great because it helped me grow confidence and grow knowledge and grow my career, was no longer a nice to have. It now became sink or swim. So you have to rely on the expertise of these people, you have to get it all in one box, and you have to deliver it without really knowing how it came to be that way. And so that starts to become just about people. I can't tell you if your maths is right, I can't tell you if your selections are right, I don't really know exactly how you came to the conclusion. But I trust you, I know that you understood what we're looking for, I've asked you some questions that would lead me to gain confidence or not, and then I just have to trust that you are competent and you've done a good job. And so that's when the transition came from being good at my job versus making other people good at their jobs.
It sounds to me like you had some kind of innate focus on people from the start, whether that was intentional or not. And I know about you that intentionality is a very important concept for you. We've talked about it briefly before. Would you say, or how would you talk about how this core value of humans, of people, especially in the context of business, was developed? Was it intentional? Was there an unintentional part? Or was it a mixture of both?
I like people, so I enjoy the company of people. I like talking to people. If you look at my high school days, my university days, I enjoy spending time learning from people, understanding people's diverse backgrounds. So there's an enjoyment factor. So that's important. Like if you hate people, good luck. You're not really going to be a people leader. But I like people. I really like learning from people, getting other people's opinions and perspectives. I think the intentionality of it was around this concept that I'm not here just because I need your help. So the example I used before where I would turn up at people's offices and say, look, I really have this thing and I really need your help. That was almost never the first interaction. And I think building relationships with people before you need them is probably the intentionality part of it. So when I first started as a technical engineer after being out of the industry for 7 years, I was very cognizant of the fact that I didn't know anything. And when I went out and sought mentors, I always looked for those people, not because I thought they would be valuable later on, because I recognized that they were very good at what they did and they had a lot of knowledge and they were the sort of people that were willing to share. And so, in terms of the intentionality, that's probably the extent from a professional standpoint, is that I enjoyed and intentionally went out and built a network of experts and mentors as part of my own development. So before I needed to turn up and say, I need your help, I turned up and said, I recognize that you're highly skilled at what you do. I'm just starting out. And, I'd really appreciate it if you would be willing to help me in a way that allows me to grow my career, which is different from turning up with, I have a problem. But the benefit of doing that is that when you do turn up with, I have a problem, they don't go, hi, what's your name? Right? You don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
Or that girl. And so the intentionality, I think, for me around people is that if you genuinely like people and you want a relationship with those people, not because it's a need, but because you value that, I think that's the intentionality part of it. If you sit by yourself in your corner office and you fumble around in the dark until you really, really, really need that help, and then you go looking for someone, it's the first time they've ever met you, you're probably off to a bad start.
Yeah, okay. I get that. It aligns pretty neatly with even just the concept of professional networking and being someone who's available to support and help, as well as someone who's willing to expose themselves for their shortcomings, and say, hey, I'm not good at this. I know you're good at this. What can I help you with? Because I need help with that. So you have said before to me that the people are the source of value. They transform potential into value. But people can also be a source of conflict. People can also be a source of difficulty and challenge. So I'd like to hear about some challenges that you faced in your career with people specifically. You don't have to name names. And other challenges beyond people, if you have any to share. And then what advice you would give to young professionals out there who are watching this and trying to deal with challenges of their own, especially around people, because it's an area that you are quite knowledgeable in, and anything else you'd like to share on that front too.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think in my personal life and my career, I've had plenty of challenges, but I think they're a healthy part of career. I think growth comes from challenges. If you don't have some sort of struggle, then I don't think you build resilience. I don't think you really do grow. I think that's the idea of stress that helps you grow. So I've had plenty of opportunities in my career to have those sorts of relationships with people, and sometimes you can make it work and sometimes you can't. I've had some tough relationships in my career. I think one comes specifically to mind, and it's probably the one that really also drew a line in my career when it was time to get out of management and get back into technical. And I think we've talked about it before, but that was one of those relationships where I had decided that the current situation was not suitable. And now this is another thing where you really have to back yourself, because you tend to have your own values and your own morals and your own beliefs around what's right, how you should treat people. In this one situation, I had a very challenging direct boss and quite a challenging one-up boss. And I'd made the decision there that I could really not work for my boss anymore because of the way that he communicated and the way that he treated me, and also the variability in his demeanour and the language and a lot of stuff. And so I actually approached the one-up and said, look, I really like the work and I really like working for the company and I really am enjoying the technical challenges, but I'm 100% not enjoying working for this person. And so my compromise was, all I want to do is change reporting lines. And at that time, that person told me that, well, you just have to suck it up. And that's one of those little steps or chasms, right? Because you go, oh, well, thanks very much. I'm glad we had this conversation. And you go back to suck it up. Or you say, well, as I said, I don't think I can work that person. And if you don't see any other option for me to work here, then I feel like we're reaching the end of this relationship. If you back yourself that far, you'll either get a no, I've changed my mind, I'll make the changes, or a yes, you're right, it's probably over. And sometimes in these relationships that you have with colleagues or bosses or even in your personal life, you have to stick to your guns in terms of being aligned with what you believe is right and what's aligned with your own values, and try not to compromise, because again, it's a slippery slope. So if you've worked up the gumption to have the conversation and the outcome is you can sit back down and suck it up, well, what was the point of having the conversation? Were you hoping to invoke a change because you're proving that you're willing to stay no matter what? So you're reinforcing those behaviours. They're unacceptable, but I'll stay anyway. And so sometimes you put your vote with your feet, or you put your money where your mouth is, and you back yourself. Well, I'm not going to be successful here. I'm not enjoying it here. Yes, you pay me well, but my motivation is not money, and there's a lot of ways to make money. And you reach an agreement. Well, you're not giving me what I want. I'm afraid this is not for me. But also that fundamentally led me to that decision that I made. It's actually, you know what, I'm probably too pigeonholed here. I've become a very senior manager. I'm not really doing much technical stuff. I think the next chapter will be a technical role, and that tied into that decision. So that's a situation where, yes, it's a challenging situation, and you could definitely stay, and you could be miserable, and you could make a lot of money. And so these decision points, you look back, and they're sort of sliding door moments. Could have stayed. Maybe I would have burnt out. Maybe I would have resigned. Who knows? But after saying, like, this is what I think is the right thing to happen, and having the business say, well, that's not going to happen, so you have choice. You say, well, I wouldn't have organised this meeting if I didn't think there was a choice. My choice is that if you can't give me what I think is right, then I think we're finished. And you leave lunch and the decision's made. That's a very, very ballsy thing for a mid-20s person to do, especially when there's no other job lined up. So that's a chasm moment, right? You can sit there at lunch and you can stare across the table and you can say, nah, it's cool, I'll see you back at the office. Or you can say, well, I'm glad we had this conversation. I think the outcome is that I've said that what I think should happen, you've said that you don't really agree, and we can agree to disagree and I'll leave. Or we can agree to disagree and I'll just suck it up. That's a very difficult decision, and that for me is one of those defining moments in my career where enough was enough, but I didn't want to just resign. So I sort of gave some options. And so that's a challenge, right? And I think you need to be aware, and it's probably influenced a lot of my methodologies going forwards. You need to be aware what the outcomes of the interaction is going to be. and you need to define them and you need to commit to them. I'm either going to work for you or I'm going to be working for someone else, but I'm definitely not working for this person anymore. If you've aligned your thinking with that, then the outcome doesn't surprise you. But if you rolled into that meeting thinking, well, they're going to fire my boss and give me a promotion, you'd be sadly disappointed. So knowing the outcomes that are available to you, that was important. Personal challenges, I think we all have them. Everyone has relationships. Everyone, has different things going on. We all lose people over time. And they can materially affect how well you perform in your career. And I think for me, it's about understanding that if you are like me and you're a reasonably high-performing person, you dedicate a lot of time and effort into your career. And the challenges personally can sometimes surprise you. But if you don't pay close enough attention to them, they can really derail things. They can lead to health problems, they can lead to mental health problems, they can lead to just poor performance on your work front, which can lead to impacting your career. So I think when things start to go wrong in your personal life, I think it needs a lot more attention than people give it. And of course, I know lots of people, myself included, who have had a divorce in their past. And when you get older, you tend to reflect on these things and wonder, how could it have gone differently? Not saying whether it was good or bad, but whether or not you allocated your limited time and resources in the appropriate way to get the best outcome out of it. And a lot of us, when we're younger, we're very career focused and we're very focused on money, and that can lead you to not focus on your health, not focus on your relationships, maybe not spend as much time with your family as you should, and that can sow the seeds for challenges later on. So being mindful of that stuff and giving the right amount of time and effort to it is important too.
Yeah, I like your perspective on the challenges there. And I would personally say that's quite a mature approach for a 20-something-year-old approaching probably a VP in the workplace, to say, and to be gutsy enough to know that you'd made up your mind. If this is the response, here's the decision I'm making. And if this is the response, then I've got what I came here for, and I get to keep all the things that I like about this situation, and I get to get rid of the bad things. And I'm sure you'd agree that as people, as humans, we can get great satisfaction from overcoming challenges. Not at the time, typically. Typically, the satisfaction comes once the challenge is firmly in the rearview mirror. But by overcoming them, you can definitely derive a great sense of satisfaction, I feel. And for me, you have often spoken to me about your why, or my why, or people's why. And I guess how finding satisfaction is part of that. That's part of the why. Those two concepts are kind of interlinked. So how would you say that young professionals that are early in their career, that are watching this video, how can they use these concepts to build genuinely fulfilling careers? What are the key elements in your mind that can help someone early on in their career build that truly fulfilling career?
Well, I think it's challenging. That's probably the key. And I would say that for anyone I think fundamentally figuring out what your purpose in life is fundamental to having a good time, having a successful career, having a successful life, as you define success. Not success by the instant millionaire, but success as you define it. My experience is that most people get stuck on a what or a how. I work for the money. Okay, well, if you're Scrooge McDuck, that probably is okay. If you don't know what Scrooge McDuck is, that's because I'm older than you. But early on, you have these needs, and the needs for financial stability underpin a lot of things. They underpin your health, they underpin your lifestyle. You want to get a roof over your head, you want to not be hungry, and so that's a motivator. But it's not a purpose. Your purpose is to be healthy and safe and secure, and the path to that is money. And to get the money, you have to work. So again, thinking about the purpose. As you get further on in life, you often achieve financial security, and if you haven't taken the time to figure out your purpose or what drives you or what motivates you, my experience has been that if you've been solely focused on money and materialistic sort of pursuits, that becomes a very poor motivator, and it doesn't make you happy anymore. And it doesn't allow you to align your efforts with anything else other than the pursuit of money. But of course, in our society, especially in OECD countries in Australia, by the time you're quite senior in the professional world or the corporate world, you're no longer using money to fulfill your basic needs. So early on, yes, your basic needs for shelter and safety and food fulfilled by money. So that all sort of works in as your basic needs are your purpose. But then once you've fulfilled those, you need to generate essentially your own internal motivation for your purpose. Mine has over time sort of gravitated towards people and the potential of people and how people add value and how I add value to people. Given that idea that if you make people happy, if you make their lives better, if you make them more successful, or you make them less stressed, or make them feel like they belong and they're having a fulfilling life and a fulfilling career, they're all the things that make me really happy and motivated. And I have enough income to support all of my basic needs. So this is no longer the key driver. I often say there are many, many ways to make money, and you can make lots of money or you can make little money. But that doesn't really correlate very well to your happiness or the way that you get fulfillment from the way you spend your time. So the way that I've looked at it now is I have tried to create the maximum, I guess, fulfillment in my life by looking at my family and my personal life and my work life, and look at how I can make those things all work together to both make myself happy, my family happy, and to provide as much value to those that I work with, so that they can then continue on that sort of daisy chain of making other people fulfilled and motivated and happy. And for me, that took a while to come into focus. And it's not what's going to be the purpose for everyone. But now that I think that I've got that clarity, it really helps me align the things that I dedicate my time to, the things that I put energy and effort into. If they align with that, I tend to be motivated and I'm happy with the outcomes. And versus, I don't. If I was just doing things for the money, I would probably go and take a very high-paying corporate job somewhere and write board papers. Pays the bills, probably wouldn't make me happy.
So following on from that then, do you think it's good advice for young people to try to align their passion with their work? And if so, what advice would you give to people to achieve that alignment?
I think the answer is not too soon. I've not been asked this question before. So I think because I focused on creating a strong foundation, it gave me the opportunity later in life to align my efforts with a purpose. If you specialize too early, and if you chase what you think is your passion or you think is your purpose early on, people change over time. So, in my 30s, I was probably considerably more materialistic than I am in my 40s. In my 20s, I had a young family and I was motivated to make things comfortable for them. If I just chased money in my 20s, then I probably would have become a very senior leader, but probably a better manager than I was a leader. If I'd gone and done what I really, really liked, which was I really enjoyed technical stuff, I would have done that. If I'd just done what I think is best for the family, it would have specialised me in a way that I think would have limited my future options. So I think during your 20s, I would think it's about discovering your purpose. And I think the way to go about that is seek out new experiences. If your passion in life is to help disadvantaged people in Africa, well, you might want to go try that out before you make it your entire passion project, because you may find that's not for you. So I think variety in your early stages of your career is important. Obviously, it all has to have some common theme, because you don't want to become quite jack of all trades, master of none. You want to be jack of many trades and quite good at all of them, is my opinion. But yeah, so I think if you go too hard too early on what is passion and what is purpose, I don't think in your 20s you have the breadth of experience and exposure to really refine what that is. And you can be misguided by external motivators like money or materials or family, or you can be driven by passion. And passion is not purpose. And passion often is more fleeting. And so that can drive you all over the shop if you're just chasing passion projects. So I would say early on, be open to the possibilities that you don't know what your purpose in life is, and be comfortable with the fact that that's okay. I don't think just chasing it down to figure it out. I think it's kind of like chasing a lucid dream. It's like chasing a shadow, right? I think it develops over time, and you've just got to be mindful of it and keep checking in and evaluating the experiences you've had to help bring clarity around what your purpose is going to be.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I find that a lot of younger people feel like they need to have it all figured out, which includes, well, I need to know what I'm going to be doing. I need to know what my purpose is. And as you've just explained, it's not a rigid black and white, well, that's my purpose. I'm going to go live in Africa and help disadvantaged people over there. Even if that happens to be exactly the right thing for you, there's quite a good chance that you will evolve beyond that as you grow as a person, and something new will form part of your purpose and your purpose for being. So I like that advice. I think it's really useful. It aligns neatly with previous advice that you were talking about. Hey, I don't know how to do this. That humility, I guess, is part of it. Accepting you don't know what you don't know, and you don't need to know everything, including what your purpose is in your career and in your life. So there are people in situations, though, who genuinely have little opportunity or far less opportunity to, say, pursue their passion or their purpose or something that's meaningful to them because they haven't met those core basic needs that you spoke about. They don't have the financial independence or even the financial means to move beyond those core requirements of living as a person on the earth. So I guess what I'm getting around to is that is, it's difficult for people to try and make these. It's easy for us to sit here as, white males in an OECD country that have had plenty of opportunities, plenty of education to say, well, just find what you're passionate about. Don't worry about the money. But not everyone has that luxury. So situations like that, not that specifically for you, although you can talk about a situation if you've had it, a similar one to that. It's a difficult situation to be in, to say, I know that I want to do more, but I'm stuck, or I feel like I can't move beyond this because I have these constraints. So what do you do in situations where you feel like you're constrained, where you feel like you're stuck, where you feel like you're in a situation where you want to do something else, but I can't, to change your perspective?
Yeah, it's a very good observation, and it's a very good question. I think everyone has the ability to change their circumstances. Maybe not by a lot, maybe not particularly impactful, but every day I think is an opportunity. It's sort of my philosophy around this idea that time is such a friable and such a perishable thing that every day you have a choice to make. Now, there are many, many people in the world whose only choice is to figure out how to get through the day, whether that's enough to eat or enough to drink or illness or sanitation or whatever the case may be. But assuming you're watching this and you're someone who has the ability to make some change, really what I find, and one of my strengths predominantly from my career as a technical professional engineer, is that every problem can be broken down into smaller problems. And the process is critical thinking. And for every problem, there's a predecessor or there's a part of it. So my advice for people who feel stuck is to figure out what the first step is. And it's not, in this case, it's not the chasm. In this case, it is the baby steps. Because whatever your big problem is, it's usually many, many little problems. And those many, many little problems have little solutions. And if you solve them incrementally, if you take 5 little steps, you'll find you're 5 little steps away from where you were. So you've made the change. It can seem overwhelming when it's one long leap, but maybe 5 little steps is quite achievable. Identifying which is the right step to take can be a challenge, but I also think that if you take a step, you will be in a different set of circumstances. Might be better, might be worse, but it is definitely different. You might learn something on the way, you might improve your situation, you might unfortunately worsen your situation, in which case you have to take a step back. But if you invoke change in your life through making changes yourself, that's the best way to progress away from where you are. And I think that applies to nearly everything in life. There are not that many large problems, and my experience has been that any problem that seems large is really just because it's a combination of lots of other little problems.
I like that. And so how do you people can be stuck in this analysis paralysis. They can be stuck, I can't even define the first step, that one small change. Do you have any thoughts on, I agree with you. There is always a change you can make. It's a case of having the right mindset to thinking about it and deciding I'm going to make a change and accepting that maybe this change is going to be detrimental to me. But at least I know that it's change, and you can create that change momentum to get to where you want to be. How do you get past that mental block?
So change is difficult, and like most difficult things, if you do it a few times, it seems not as difficult. Partly from the idea that you get better at it, partly from the resilience that you're better equipped to deal with the consequence of the change. I often say, if you want to get up early, just set your alarm 10 minutes early. Most people go and say, I'm going to start getting up at 5 a.m. Like, sure. How do you go about that? You set the alarm, it startles you out of your sleep, and you turn it off and go back to sleep. But incremental change is one of the easiest types of changes to make. In fact, we make it all the time without realising. We look at our phone when we should be going to bed, and we've gone to bed 10 minutes later. The intentionality behind the type of change you make, and if you're unsure of the outcome, make the change anyway, because the change is the difficult part. So I often say to people, look, if you want to get up at 6 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock, set your alarm 10 minutes early. By Monday, you'll be getting up an hour early, because the 10 minutes will eventually be, I was getting up at 7 and now next Monday I'm getting up at 6. And every day, it's just 10 minutes earlier. And that 10 minutes probably gives you an opportunity to go to bed earlier. And if you take that opportunity, that change will stick. Now, you can always just not and get more tired over time, and then it's detrimental. That's okay, because you've made a change and you've seen an impact. And it's impacted you and you've learned something from it. Maybe you've learned how to function when you're an hour's less sleep because you've just not bothered going to bed early. So I often say that if you're not sure what to do, doing something is better than nothing. Don't try for the chasm jump if you're not sure what's on the other side. Have a destination in mind. But small changes. I say to my clients, I have wellness and well-being as a centric element of my practice. And I say, so you want to you want to improve your health and your well-being, and you've got all these great motivators, and you just can't find the time. And I say, well, it's easy. Just get off the bus one stop earlier. You'll walk the rest of the way. You make that little change, you will find your way to your office, and you will get 2,000 steps. No go, I'll be late. You're like, yeah, you might be 10 minutes late. But that's 10 minutes of walking you just did, and that's cool. So you might be 10 minutes late, but you might have done 15 minutes of walking. So the actual delta's not too bad. And so small changes where you go, well, what would that do? I don't know. You might find that it's just as quick. You might find that you get healthier over time. You might find that it does nothing except make you sweaty. Good. Well done. You've done something. And so I think doing something is better than wallowing around in the overwhelmingness of the challenge or the change it needs making. So for all of my clients, and for people I mentor and for young people, I think it's that you just make a change. Do something slightly different, because the change will be an outcome. The thing you do will result in the incremental change. You won't get healthier. You'll walk more or eat less or go to the gym, and the result will be get healthier. So often we think of the change as being the outcome we're looking for, but actually that's a resultant of the smaller changes we make to get the outcome. And I think that's where people can sometimes get overwhelmed with, I'm going to do a whole new fitness program, I'm going to change my diet, I'm going to get up early, and actually you're not going to do any of those things because they're all very difficult, large-scale changes. So I think that's the element of changes, like do something small, do something meaningful, have a go, there'll be a change. There might be a good consequence or a bad consequence, but at least you'll have a change to deal with.
Totally agree. I think that maintaining and sustaining what you might call wholesale change it requires so much willpower, and willpower is finite. It has a limit, even if you are a very strong-willed person. So, and like anything, incremental negative change happens over time. For instance, if you gain a lot of weight over time, it's only a little bit at a time. But at the point in time where you measure it and go like, oh, this is not good for me, I need to do something about this, we for some reason expect that, well, I'll just have a perfect diet and exercise routine for 1 month and everything will be solved. But it took you 15 years to get here, so why do you think it won't take 15 years to get back to where you were? Because it was very slow incremental change. And it's easy to let it happen without intentionality. So there is a couple of things that I like to ask in each one of these interviews. So indulge me if you would.
No problem.
Looking back over several years, I'm not going to reveal your age, obviously. You've said you're in your 40s, all good. Over the history of your career, what advice, concise, simple advice would you give to your younger self right at the start of your career? Let's just say maybe that first or second year out of uni.
I'd say be bold and develop a professional network. So I think a lot of success relies on you having a good professional network, because you can be as bold as you like, but there are still no opportunities. So opportunities generally come from within your network. So I would say be bold. Don't worry whether you have the experience, and don't worry whether you have the expertise, because someone else can make that decision for you. So apply for that job. Ask the question, do you have any opportunities? Because the worst that can happen is they say no. And so be bold, but develop a network so that you have people you can ask, or you have people that think of you when there's opportunities. So they're the two things that I think are quite important. And then the boldness translates into saying yes when you get an opportunity, because you get offered something. Yeah, so taking the risk. So being bold in the asking, but also being bold in the accepting.
And last but not least, do you have any specific book, movie, podcast, or other content or material, other than, of course, this video, recommendations that had an impact on your life that you like to share with people, specifically young professionals, that you think might have a positive impact on their life if they consume it?
Yeah, I recently reread a book called Atomic Habits, and I think it's by James Clear, and it's called Tiny Changes and Remarkable Results. And I think that leans in nicely to the point that we just made around change, is that if you try and take huge, large leaps, they're high risk, and there is a good opportunity they'll fail. So I really like that book because it provides clarity around the idea of building habits and habit stacking, and how to try and make those habits change from being incremental changes into genuine habits. And as people, we tend to live our life broadly habitually. A lot of the things we do are not with intent; they're just things that we do over time. Well, they all developed from habits. And so they all became habits from little routines. So I think if your listeners have an opportunity to read that book or listen to that podcast, it's really worth it.
Excellent. Well, that's going to wrap it up for today. And I wanted to just sincerely thank you for taking the time out, because we've spent quite a bit of time here recording today. So thank you for your insights, and thank you for taking the time to pay it forward, I guess, to the younger generation, which is something that I'm trying to do. Personally, it's one of my philosophies, and helping out the next generation with issues and problems and to be the best version of themselves that they can be, I think is something for me that's really important, and I believe you share those views. So thank you for taking the time, and we'll call it there.
All right. Thanks very much, Dan. Appreciate it.